Hello and welcome to episode 230 of The Dive Down, a Magic the Gathering podcast focused on the latest decks, trends, and strategies for the casual spike. My name is Dave, here in lovely western suburban Chicago. And with me on the line, I have one voiced partner and one silent partner this week. Let's start with the one with the voice. It's Devon O'Donnell, a.k.a. Doomwake. Hey, Devon.
I mean, I have a voice. I wouldn't necessarily say it's the voice, but yeah, we got we got Stan on here as well. We're not going to we're not going to have Stan introduce himself, but just know that Stan is here in spirit. He's waving to the camera now.
Stan, do you want to croak anything out?
I can't talk, but I can sing.
It's an interesting one. So Stan has played some decks for us, so we're going to keep him on the chat, even though he really can't talk today. But he is here with us in actuality and not just in spirit. Shane is off this week on vacation. He's probably on getting prepared to drive to my house right now for us to hang out for a few days coming up here over the July 4th weekend. But on this week's show, we're going to talk more about Lord of the Rings, and especially we're going to talk about that one ring. That one ring that one ring that everybody is just have such an attachment to right now. You know, we have some more experiences playing. Stan's been playing a bit. I've been playing a bit, but we've played some scams, some 4-color money pile, a bunch of other decks that Devon has shoved the one ring into, Living End. But first, let's do a little bit of housekeeping. New patron. So we have Crimpin Cards as a new patron. So thank you very much, Crimpin, for joining us. I wonder if those are like misprint crimps. Like, have you ever got a pack where you open a booster pack where you have the you know what I found in a collection, my dad's collection the other day? I have a crimped beta Life Force. Do you remember Life Force? The like weird green uncommon.
Yeah, Life Force is dope. I remember that.
Yeah. I found that the other day and I was like, okay, great. What do I do with this? So now it's just in a box next to my beta counter spells that I'm like, I don't know what else to do with this card, but
I have I think it's like a, not revised, but whatever or maybe it is revised. I have a revised Tsunami that's like crimped at the bottom.
Oh, nice. That's good. I also have a Homelands Carapace that I found that is crimped, and I'm like, there must be someone in this world who wants a Homelands card that has a crimp.
The collectors.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, thank you for joining Crimpin Cards. If you'd like to support The Dive Down directly, you can go to patreon.com/thedivedown. Check it out. We got swag, get into our Discord, all that kind of stuff. You can go to thedivedown.com/store for apparel. You can use Mana Traders, which we've been using for a long time, and use the code TheDiveDown2023 to rent Magic Online cards and get 10% off your first 2 months. You can also go to Barrister and Man and use code TheDiveDownM23 for great shaving products and soaps and get 15% off your first order there. And then finally, Energy Plus, if you want to get 8% off for doing nothing, go to nerdragegaming.com and use Dive8 to get 8% off your order. All right. That was some housekeeping.
Definitely was. It was a good segment. I liked it.
Yeah. We're trying to keep it under 3 or 4 minutes from now on. I promise, everybody.
Week 1.
So let's just dive right into it.
All right. Let's do it.
Modern continues to be a changed place, true or false?
True, definitely. 100%.
So Devon, you've been grinding a lot more leagues than I have. I was on vacation last week, but I did fit some play in. What's it feel like right now?
Well, I mean, it's weird because, you know, you do play against the card, the One Ring, a lot, but there are still a lot of people that cannot acquire them because they are ridiculously expensive on Magic Online still, and they are impossible to rent from rental services. So you have kind of like the people who have them, which is a small percentage of the population, it feels like. Assuming that price was not a factor, I would have to imagine that I play against it a lot more.
Mm-hmm. How much do you feel like you play against it now?
Maybe like 1, maybe 2 times a league, but closer to 1. Maybe
interesting.
1.5.
Okay. Oh, interesting. That's a little less than I was thinking. I admittedly, I have not run into it quite yet because apparently nobody in the friendly league, which is what I was playing this time to kind of knock the rust off, if you will, had any. So it was interesting to play a whole bunch of decks where I kept expecting someone to draw it, and maybe they had it, maybe they didn't, but I just didn't get it. So there's obviously on Twitter, and just from content creators like yourself and Ever, like everybody, we've seen a lot of tweets about decks with the One Ring in them. You and Shane talked about it a lot last week. There's everything from 4-color Money Pile, again, and it's really worth calling it Money Pile again, given the way that the One Ring is worked out. Rhinos, Ponza, Reanimator featuring the One Ring, Blue-Eye Control. We have some Dimir Asmo decks working on with the One Ring. I kind of feel like we should start with 4-color Money Pile. What do you think? Is that the best deck to talk about first?
Yeah, that makes sense because this deck specifically, it kind of is like the most natural home for the Ring because, you think 4-color Money Pile, it's a deck that has a lot of like ways to buy time because it plays a lot of removal spells, stuff like Leyline Binding, sometimes Prismatic Ending, and then it also has Delighted Halfling, so you can go, not only can you ramp into the One Ring, but you can also make it uncounterable off of the Halfling. So, and all of the pitch elementals, and then you have Omnath with extra mana from Omnath, so you want more stuff to do with your Omnath mana. But yeah, I mean, this deck just crushed this week, and there was 4 challenges, and it won 3 of them. So,
oh gosh, I did not even realize that it was that much. 12 total copies between all the top 32s, won 3 of the 4 challenges. Who are the pilots of those? So Ever was in the finals of one of the challenges on 4-color Money Pile, right? Against somebody else who was also on 4-color. Is that correct?
Yep, he played against Magic Online user Harry13, lost in the finals. So Harry13 won one of them, McWinsauce won another one, and then the other one was Kion1024. I'm not familiar with that name, but yeah, I mean, it just absolutely... And I was actually... I'm looking at the last challenge, the Sunday morning challenge, because the numbers that I put in there were not updated with this one. So it looks like in the top 32, there is actually only 2 copies. So that number goes up to 14. But it just, winning 3 of the 4 challenges is still insane.
That is totally insane. And you know what, Devon, I have to say, once you and Spike were talking about playing the One Ring with Omnath on the kind of final spoiler episode that we did a few weeks ago, you guys convinced me that we are entering into what I like to call a 4-color story arc. Because every once in a while in Modern, thanks to Omnath and other cards, we get in this moment where everybody says 4-color is not good anymore, and then suddenly it's just the best deck again.
Right.
And it really feels to me like I just can't get over this feeling, looking at all the other decks that have the One Ring in them, that we are entering the Uro made 4-color the best deck, Oko made 4-color the best deck, Yorion made 4-color the best deck, and now we have the One Ring making the 4-color the best deck again. What do you think about that hypothesis?
I mean, it sounds to me like the problem the entire time might have been Omnath, huh? I'm just throwing that out there.
Or Renin 6?
Yeah, or Renin 6, to be fair. But it's... we're going to throw a little Stan mention here. Stan mentions it's funny how all those cards except Oko were card advantage engines. I know, yeah, it's crazy. And just like, I mean, Omnath is kind of a card advantage engine, but it's more than that because it's card advantage, it's mana, it's life gain, it stabilizes, it just kind of like does everything, and that's kind of like the whole package. And somehow that's the only piece that's basically remained intact throughout this entire time.
Yeah. I mean, the deck is good. It's so funny. It's a deck that I never want to play. Like every time it's good,
Me too.
I have all these cards and I'm like, am I really going to do Omnath? Like I hate Omnath. Am I going to do that? And just so people know, these decks that we're looking at, really all that's different about them from what you would imagine is they have 4 Delighted Halfling, like Devon mentioned. They have 3 or 4 rings. Like the list that I happen to be looking at right now from Fencing Brick only has 3 rings. I've seen a lot of them with 4 rings. Who knows if that's card availability or if it's something else.
I would like to mention the McWinsauce list is actually a little bit different. It's more blue-white control that has Omnath and Renin 6. There's no Halflings. But, still, there's only 2 Omnaths as well. So 2 Omnath, Renin 6, and then Counterspell, Force Negation, Verdict, Ring, Prismatic Ending, Leyline Binding, stuff like that.
Yeah, way more on the control side for that particular one. McWinsauce, of course, longtime well-known control player on Magic Online. It generally gravitates towards something that has the best counter magic that is available in it at different points in time. Although I've seen him play different things along the years as well. But this deck is just,
it's really good.
Being able to play Omnath and then play the One Ring off of Omnath. You have the Teferi kind of thing in there as well, where you can pick the One Ring back up if you want to. You have Delighted Halfling, like Devon said, where you can ramp out your one Ring and make it uncounterable, which was kind of like a mind-blowing thing when I realized that was true as well. It's tough. I don't know what to say about this other than deck is just good.
Oh,
This
yeah.
deck is good.
Yeah, I watched Aspiring Spike play at least a good percentage of the challenge. Like after I was done streaming because he was still playing because he made the top 8. I kind of watched most of his top 8 matches and just I don't know, the first 2 matches he just easily breezed through. Just the games were none of the games were even close, and it just Omnath, specifically Omnath generating the mana is so powerful with the ring because you're drawing a bunch of extra cards, and usually the problem when you draw 3 or 6 cards, I know, problem in quotation marks, but usually you can't deploy a lot of those resources fast enough. But Omnath giving you this huge jump in mana alongside the pitch spells just gives you like a lot much more stuff to do with your mana, and it's just like a perfect storm kind of thing.
Yeah. And by the way, this deck is I'm looking at McWinsauce's list right now. As you mentioned, that's the one that's more blue-white. That one is 970 tickets on MTGO. Let's see, Harry 13's is 961. The one Spike was playing is 1,145 tickets on Magic Online. So
money bags over there.
Yeah, exactly. He has the extra special tier for Mana Traders. He just didn't tell us about it.
True.
Yeah.
I will say that 961 ticks might sound like a lot, but I feel like before, like during the Oko Uro era of when 4-color was good, I feel like it was in the like 1700 ticket range.
You're right. I don't know what happened with that. I mean, there's always weird things about the Magic Online economy that we don't understand, but it was definitely above 1,500 tickets during that era as well, driven by the cost of Red and 6 at that point in time. A couple of good questions. So we're going to take some questions from the chat since Stan is here. And participating, listening. So he's in my ear right now asking, how good is Blood Moon against a Resolved One Ring? How good is Blood Moon against this particular 4-color deck? Do you think is that a path to helping you out against this deck, or where do we think it falls as like a counterplay against 4-color?
If we want to use Harry's specific list as a baseline, I mean, the thing about Blood Moon is you can still cast the One Ring under it. So even if you get Blood Moon, you can cast the ring, buy you a little bit of time. And Harry's deck in particular also features Fable the Mirror Breaker, which is exceptional against an opposing Blood Moon. They can, as long as they fetch out like one of their basics early, if you fetch out the basic planes, you can eventually find a Leyline Binding. So I don't know. I mean, it's not bad, but it's not going to get you. Oh, Delighted Halfling too, another mana fixer against Blood Moon. So I'm actually like, weirdly enough, I don't even think Blood Moon's that great against this deck.
Yeah. All right.
To the point where I actually would not be surprised if the 4-color decks started adapting their own Blood Moons. Remember when they did that with like the abundant? Yeah.
Yeah, they definitely did that stuff in the past, which always broke my heart even more because, like I said, this is not my vibe usually, although I do have all the cards in this deck. So and I'm always telling myself, if this is the best deck, I should just play it. And then I'm like, no. Well, I don't have rings and halflings yet, of course, because who does? Who does? All right, so let's talk about, I guess, last question before we leave this area. We got a Pro Tour coming up. Mm-hmm. Shot in the dark right now. I really want to do a Pro Tour episode, like in the next couple of weeks, a Pro Tour preview episode. Of course, we got to do it. Yeah. But shot in the dark, how much of the field do you think, a field of Pro Tour players, Devon, do you think brings 4-color money pile to play?
Well, if you asked me after this weekend, given its dominant results, I'd probably say, like, I still feel like the cap is, like, 15%. I don't think we're going to see any deck above 15%. But yeah, that would probably be my number, somewhere in the 10 to 15% range.
Yeah. I mean, that's my guess too, just because Pro Tour players cannot get enough of playing Control, like we've talked about many times, and they can't get enough of playing Omnath. Now, these 4-color decks, they're not really Control decks unless you take them that way, like McWinsauce did and made them overtly more Control, which I have to think is actually a play to play against other 4-color decks would be my guess, right? To go a little bit more aggressive with counter magic, stop some of the things that are going on, not just go pure value. Because if you're going up against non-creature decks, how much of the creature removal stuff do you really need out of your 4-color, your removal, your interaction package? So then you sway it a different direction to interact with other things, I would imagine. But I just feel like this is going to rocket there.
On the counterspell note, I would note it's you got to be a little bit careful playing against Delighted Halfling. That can be, if you can't kill that Delighted Halfling and you're sitting on, counterspell like Mage's Charm, well, I guess Charm can steal it, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. Interestingly, McWinsauce does not have any Delighted Halfling in their deck.
Well, he's the blue-white, really,
Yeah, he's much more blue-white, yeah. Still Ren and 6, of course.
Gotta play Ren.
Okay, so I think that's enough for 4-color for now. obviously this deck isn't going anywhere, but the ring is really doing lots of other things as well. You played a lot with it this weekend. What were some of your favorite? What do you think is the next deck that's interesting to talk about?
Well, let's go to. I mean, we are a Rhino Boys podcast, so why don't we give a shout out to Rhinos? I know Stan will probably love this segment. So as he nods his head, we are. So the One Ring is a card that I thought was going to help Rhinos quite a bit. I actually played a couple of different versions on stream. I tried a 4-color list and I tried a teamer list. I was a little bit of a bigger fan of the 4-color list because being on leyline binding is a good spot right now, given that other people are playing ring, and that's one of the best answers to opposing rings. And getting to play Teferi means that you can reset your own ring if it gets a little bit too far. But I was a pretty big fan of this. Like the line that I thought of was, turn 3 Cascade spell. You have this kind of overwhelming advantage, and a lot of times that advantage is good, but your opponent gets that one turn to do their thing, and you kind of have to attack and you get into this racing situation. And playing the ring after as a follow-up to a Cascade spell is not only you're guaranteed to live, you can't die that turn, and even if your first wave gets dealt with, you have an overwhelming card advantage to find that second wave as well.
Right.
So I was a really, really big fan of it specifically in the Rhino stack.
And I mean, this is a question we'll come back to a little bit later, but is leyline binding basically the best card against the One Ring in Modern right now?
Well, yes, because it's instant speed. So a lot of times, if your opponent has Ring and they cast Ring with some mana open, like in the Omnath case, you want to be able to binding it in response. So for those of you who don't know, the Ring specifically says put a counter on it, then draw cards equal to the number of counters on it. If you remove the Ring in response to the trigger, it never actually gets the counter. So they don't even get the first card out of it. That's the important part. But you have to be a little careful because a lot of, specifically the 4-color decks, they're playing Boseiju. And that can kind of be a liability. Although the Ring, when it enters the battlefield, if it wasn't cast, you don't get that protection element. So if you Boseiju a binding that has a Ring on it, they don't get protection for that one turn as well.
Wow. Lots to unpack there. But that's, yeah. It is interesting. I forgot about the if you cast it part. So you cannot reanimate the ring to get to recur the trigger.
Right.
Yeah. And of course, since the ring is indestructible, leyline exile effects are the big thing. And leyline is just the best, most utility kind of exile card that we have in Modern right now, I would say, for all kinds of different things. And yeah, that trick about the counter is super, super good to know. Okay, so if that's the case, if we're on 4-color Rhinos because of this, how are your pitch kind of cards? Can you still use your Furies and your Force Negations and stuff effectively with 4 of a non-colored spell, or how did that feel?
So if we look at the specific list that I played, the numbers here, we're gone down to Fury, at least the 4th one's in the sideboard, but as far as red count is concerned, we have 4, 8... we're a little low on red. It's only 13 main deck. We have the 13 main deck on red. And then as far as green post board, so usually, let's say you're only going to bring in 4, either force or endurance. So you're going to add 4. That would be 4, 8, 16 green, which is a good number. You want to get to about 15 or 16. So I will say, you're a little low on red because the card that I'm cutting for One Ring was Dead Gone, which, might not be the best cut because it makes you a little weaker to Ragavan. But yeah, I mean, it is a little bit tough on the Fury numbers, but honestly, if we look at how the metagame is shaping up, it almost feels like Fury might just be more of a 2-of effect, or maybe even closer to a sideboard card, given that it's not that great against 4-color,
Right. Well, you can't kill a ton of stuff with it, exactly. And I will tell you, as someone who played 4 of Fury in the deck that I was playing this weekend, didn't get to use it a lot. I played against Tron 3 times. You don't get to Fury against Tron. You do get to kill them in Scam. We'll get to that later. But yeah.
Stan's yelling at me, telling me to get the Teferis out of my deck.
Stan, that seems like a mistake. I got to tell you, I know you don't like 4-color Rhinos as much as you like Teamer, but
I will say the main reason that I played Teferi was because Living End was literally everywhere, and I wanted to. That's another plus side, is because normally Rhinos is very bad against Living End, but getting to play Teferi in that matchup is kind of huge.
Yeah, I can understand that. How about a couple of other things? So one is, I notice you have 2 copies of Bone Crusher Giant in your deck. People have been speculating about that as a good answer to the ring as well, especially the protection.
Yep.
Obviously, the protection effect, like it takes away the tempo that the ring gains you by time walking, essentially. Was that good? Was that worth it? Do you think that's a viable thing for people to do as a counterplay to the ring, or what do you think?
I'll be honest, if you're playing Rhinos right now, traditional teamer Rhinos, you should probably play 4 Bone Crushers. Like, the ring is essentially everywhere. And the sick part about Bone Crusher is, like, they might not know that you have Bone Crusher, so they're just going to tap out for the ring. Like, even if you Cascade spell, they're just going to be like, haha, you can't kill me, I'm going to tap out for this ring, and you're just going to be like, okay, Bone Crusher myself, attack you for lethal. Like, you know what I mean? And they can't really play around it, because, like, I think Bone Crusher is sick right now, and that's the exact reason that I played it.
Yeah, and it came through for you.
Yeah, it happened a couple times.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's a card that's always floating on the edge of viability in Rhinos, right? And so there's a real reason to have it right now, and that makes sense to me. Finally, I guess, sequences with the ring, when you actually get the ring out, it's all about drawing into additional cascades. Is that right? Like, you're kind of like, that's where you're going. It's not as much interaction, it's more like setting yourself up for future cascade plays. Are you bummed if you draw an extra footfalls in this scenario, or no?
I mean, kind of, because you don't really have a good way to utilize it past turn 4, given that, suspending a footfalls on turn 5 or turn 6 is not really ever going to be that relevant. But I will say, in that specific instance, in post-board games, when you're boarding into Endurances and Force of Vigors, it's a lot easier to use those drawn footfalls. So it is entirely possible that maybe, like, because you're more likely to draw into those footfalls, if you want to get use out of them, it might be better if you're playing Teamer to main deck something like Endurance, so you can actually utilize that footfalls that you draw later on.
Makes sense. Let's talk about Force of Vigor for 1 second, because I've been thinking a lot about counterplay to the ring. Force of Vigor is an awesome card. It does nothing against the ring, right? So I noticed that in your list, you still had 4 Force of Vigor in your sideboard. What are you worried about in the meta game for those right now? Obviously, Hammer, if you play against it, is still like really good. Force of Vigor, obviously, so is Titan, and there's some Titan out there. But like, what's your mindset there for continuing to carry 4 forces?
I mean, it might just be because I didn't really update my sideboard, but yeah, it's mostly there for Hammer Time. You maybe could bring it in against Creativity to be able to, like, blow up treasure tokens, although that's not really that great. But the other thing is there's just a lot of leyline bindings going around, and I wanted to be able to both protect, like, if I get into a fight where, like, I binding their ring and they binding my binding, I want to be able to, like, binding their binding to get back my binding and then binding their ring and stuff like that. I know we're kind of going down a rabbit hole here, but that's really what it's there for. Mostly Amulet and Hammer Time, but yeah, those matchups are, like, not that bad as is, so maybe it's better just to play something else. I would, looking deep down the rabbit hole to try and find something that was, like, something that you wouldn't cascade into that exiled the ring, and I came up with Barrier Breach, which I'm going to pull up right now. It's from Ikoria. Yep, it's 2... Well, let me read it. 2 and a green, instant exile up to... Oh, no, that's only enchantments. Never mind. Okay, forget it. Never mind.
That one doesn't work?
Nope, doesn't work. All right.
Don't you kind of feel like there's a card out there, though? Don't you feel like there's a card out there that everybody's like, we haven't found yet, that is something like that, that's like exile? Like, I know that there's the one that was, like, made to get rid of gods from like, Born of the Gods, that's like shuffle a legendary thing back into your deck, and I'm like, I don't know. There's got to be something else.
So that one's 2 mana.
Unfortunately.
One thing that I did find, if you want, I mean, if you're getting desperate, Fade into Antiquity, 2 and a green, sorcery, exile target artifact or enchantment. But it's a sorcery.
There you go.
So,
does that do nothing else?
No, that's it.
That's a 3 mana card.
That's all you get.
You don't even get another mode? Oh boy.
No.
Okay.
I'm sure there's something better.
There's got to be. I mean, Leyline Binding is plenty good, of course, but anyway. All right. So some other decks that you had fun with. The one that there's a bunch that drew my attention, actually, but I want to start with the one because, if we were something before, or at least if Stan was something before he was a Rhino boy, and since we're doing this podcast with an audience of 1 right now, with Stan, producer Stan, listening to us right now, trying to help us move along, you got a trophy with Ponza featuring the One Ring.
I did. Yeah.
Ponza.
Ponza. Well, so I'm not. What's the technicality with like what are we calling it? Because people in the Twitter comments said that I can't call it Ponza because there's no more Stone Rain. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Like we need an expert on this.
Red green mid range is what we started calling it at different points in time on the show. Anyway, this was a list that you got from. Is his name Chris Giglio? Is that the player? Chris Giglio, who I've used his prowess lists several times in the past as well, who is kind of like a prowess breach fan for a while there. What attracted you to this list? Or like, did you just feel like, hey, I'm just going to try it because this is a place I didn't expect Ring to show up?
Well, one thing in particular, the Ring is certainly powerful. The faster you can get it down, that's why we see the Delighted Halflings and some other decks that are adopting Mana Dorks. To my knowledge, this is the only deck that can cast it on turn 2. Because this is the only deck that can produce 4 mana on turn 2 with the combination of turn 1 Arbor Elf, turn 2 Utopia Sprawl. And that's really where that's where it came from. That's where the drive to play this came from, is like the fact that you can cast it on turn 2. I will say I did that once in the league and it was completely disgusting. Won that game, very easily in a landslide. But so the cool thing about this list in particular is we're playing 4 Fury and 4 main deck Endurance, and I think one thing that I think you really want to get down with the Ring is playing a bunch of like free spells, like all the pitch cards, because the more that you can utilize the cards that you're drawing in the same turn, like the turn that you tap out or a turn that you later down the road where you tap out, the more you can utilize that stuff is good. We talked about like Blood Moon's kind of ineffectiveness against 4-color, but when you cast it on turn 2, it's a lot more effective.
Yeah, it's also still good against plenty of other decks that are out there, especially deck. We were expecting Tron to be around a lot with the Ring, and like Blood Moon is still pretty good against Tron. At least it was in the leagues that I played. That it really helped me. And but that's another thing about this deck, right? Is that this deck is really good at casting 3 drops and 4 drops on turn 2. And so that totally makes sense. I also love the idea that we want to maximize the card advantage, but the Ring doesn't come with mana advantage necessarily. So using a lot of pitch cards makes a ton of sense here.
Yeah, and then just, like this deck can kind of has some really good grinding potential, like between the 4-season Pyromancer, 2 Fables. You have a lot of stuff there. You have like the explosive starts. Again, we talked about mana acceleration into Blood Moon. And yeah, it's just kind of like, it's pretty clean deck list, basically all 4 ofs with the exception of the Fables and the 1 Magus of the Moon. But I don't know, it just felt really good. It's hard to say exactly why, but it just felt really good.
And would you come back to this one, do you think? Or do you think it's a possible contender?
Yeah. I mean, if we want to do like a sleeve believe heave, I would definitely do a sleeve on this one. I would throw it back in the queue a little bit.
There you go. How about on Rhinos? Is Rhinos a believe? Rhinos with Ring?
Rhinos is a believe, mostly because I need to do a little bit more experimenting on the numbers. And mostly because, Stan's yelling at me to cut Teferis from my deck, and I want to try it without Teferis.
Yeah. Devon, I know you have listened to our show in the past. We're going to do a rating for 4-color while we're here. And I'm going to give it a rating. I'm going to assume that you agree with me, but do you know when we give things a double sleeve rating?
What's the double sleeve?
So double sleeve is because double sleeving your card sucks. It's the worst thing in the world. So decks that are so good, they're bad. That is so good, they're unpleasant, I guess we should say.
Okay.
That is what I think. That's what 4-color is, right? Is that a double sleeve?
That would be a triple sleeve for me.
Triple sleeve. Oh, we're doing full on Daniel Wong taking turns here. We're triple sleeving our cards. Yeah. Okay.
I'll never play that deck. Like you said, I understand that it's like, it probably is one of if not the best decks right now, but I can't bring myself to play that deck. I don't know what it is about it.
It's weird. Stan used to always try to play, or never wanted to play Yorion, or never want to play 4-color when we had Yorion because it was too grindy, right, Stan? Like you're always like, oh, I don't want to take forever to do this. And then Yorion got banned and you were like, I'm going to try 4-color for a little bit. And it was still okay, but it was less annoying to play, right? And now we're back to where it's very annoying to play. Stan is just giving a big thumbs down right now. Down. Producer Stan, thumbs down. Okay. So this is kind of like, we've kind of moved from the not ring value decks. Like we're moving out into the more fringe kind of area of Ring decks that we've seen and that you've played with over the last week. So there's 2 on here that are really interesting to me. Maybe we'll save the pure control one for the end. But there's this Reanimator deck that you have and a Dimir Asmo deck that you've been playing with. I'd love to hear a bit about those ones because they're definitely a different take on what we use the Ring for.
Okay, let's do Reanimator first. So let's pop up this Reanimator deck. So far I've played 3 total leagues with this deck, combination of 13 and 2, but there's a slightly different change. So the first league trophied with Fable the Mirror Breaker, and then I decided to cut the Fables and kind of try it as more of like an Esper that just has. I moved the Leyland Bindings to the main deck as well, and that felt pretty good. But the kind of the idea here is you have Goryo's Vengeance with Atraxa. That's your main target to get back with Goryo's Vengeance. You have Faithful Mending to discard Atraxa from your hand to the graveyard. And then you also have this little card called Philagi Archaeologist, which I'm sure a lot of people don't exactly know what it does, but let me get you the exact text. I actually have to pull it up and gather because I kind of forget what it does. Well, I know what it does, but I forget the exact text on it, so let's pull this up real quick. Philagi Archaeologist. So it is a 1 and a blue for a 1/3 human scout. When it ETBs, mill 3, and then you may put a non-creature, non-land card from among the cards milled this way into your hand. If you don't, put a +1/+1 counter on it. So the really cool thing about Philagi is it can help dump your Atraxas into the graveyard. It helps find the One Ring because it says non-creature, non-land card, so you can actually, find your One Rings or find your Goryo's Vengeances. And it also blocks Ragavan. And on top of all of that, it gives you something to do with your Ephemerates when you can't find a Solitude or a Grief, because you can, normally that spot is Tainted Indulgence and Sauron's Ransom and stuff like that, but none of those work well with Ephemerate. So I have been so happy playing this deck. It's been so awesome.
I mean, it's a fascinating list. There's some other cards in here that we didn't mention yet, of course. There's 4 Solitude and 2 Grief in this list, plus the 3 Ephemerate that you kind of hinted towards a moment ago. So you get to do your kind of black-white scam type of stuff if you want to occasionally. Like you said, you pull that back with Philagi Archaeologist. It has a full grip of Atraxa, which is always okay, we are definitely casting Atraxa. Everybody. Atraxa does not get the One Ring, though. Is that right? Does it?
No, it's
no,
artifacts.
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
You can get artifacts.
Yeah, Atraxa is different card types. It's not, it's got nothing to do with color like Niv. That's right. And then tell me about Kroxa and Kuranos.
Okay, so the list that I caught, this was actually a list from MTG Pro player Kelvin Chu, who won, I believe it was a local event or something that's a 1K. And he posted this list. So I kind of copied the Kroxa and Kuranos from it. But the cool thing that it does is in games that kind of go super long, where you have a really stocked graveyard from stuff like Faithful Mending and Philagi Archaeologist, the Kroxa and Kuranos. So let's pull it up for the listeners. Kroxa and I know what the card does, but I also like to just kind of read it verbatim. So it's
I'll read this one. Oh, you got it? Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Devon.
All right, so 6/6, Vigilance Menace Lifelink for 3 red, white, black. And when it enters the battlefield or attacks, you can exile 5 cards from your graveyard. When you do, return a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. So the really sick thing is you can set up a spot where you go Goryo's... Yeah, Stan's got one right there. You can go Goryo's Vengeance Kroxa, which gives it haste, right? So you can go exile 5, get back a Solitude, and then you get to attack with the Kroxa and then do another trigger. So it's particularly powerful with Goryo's because of the haste aspect.
Right. So you get to bring back a couple of things out of your graveyard to recur them. Got it.
You can even bring back 2 Atraxas. In case you don't have enough
everything.
Cards. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's so funny because the 5.0 that I got with this deck, I did upload to YouTube, and if you only have time to watch one single match of Magic today, everybody listening to this podcast should go watch that game, because it was the most ridiculous game. It was a 45-minute game 1, which you might not have enough time to watch one game at that point, but it was a 45-minute game 1 against Living End, where I think I won with 1 card in my deck, because I literally almost decked myself going too deep with the ring. It was...
Wow.
God, it was a wild game.
Against Living End, that must have been that's a new world for a Living End player, though, right? To have to play a 45-minute long game. I mean, it's a real complicated deck, but the games don't usually go that long with it. How does the ring fit into this one? This is just awesome value engine. It comes up with Atraxa. Philagi Archaeologist helps you do it. Can you Goryo's Vengeance a ring? You can, right?
No, I wish you could.
No? It's just a
Only
creature?
you could. Yeah,
Yeah.
just creatures.
Okay.
So it kind of looks like a weird ring deck because it doesn't have a ton of interaction. It really only has prismatic ending, which, again, I later swap with binding, and then you have solitudes as well. But specifically why I think this is a good ring deck is you get to, like, you're between the solitudes and stuff like the solitude, ephemerate, grief, like you can kind of run your opponent out of stuff a little bit, and because you're playing more pitch spells, like again you have solitude and grief. I actually added a third grief in the second list that I played. You have those pitch spells, as we talked about earlier, which is a good thing to pair with the ring because you want to be able to utilize all of the cards that you're getting off of it. And also, the One Ring is just kind of like a weird discard outlet where you get so many cards in your hand that you just go to discard and you just discard a Traxa.
Let me ask you a question, because like I mentioned, I haven't gotten to play with the One Ring yet. Are you drawing 4 off of the ring sometimes? Are you drawing 5 off of the ring sometimes? Like, how far are you pushing it, or how far does it get pushed before the game gets closed?
You just keep going, baby.
You do?
you just keep going. The only thing that is preventing me from drawing cards is if I'm going to deck. Right. Otherwise, I'm just keep it coming. Keep it coming.
But how far have you got? I guess how far have you gotten? Do you remember?
Well, I think I've gotten up to 6 before. Usually once you get to like 3 or 4, that's just enough like card advantage to bury your opponent just straight up.
Yeah. 6.
Yeah.
Draw 6 cards at the ring stand.
And then reset it. So you don't die to it.
Exactly. Okay. Interesting.
I will say before we continue, I've definitely played games where I've gone a little too deep. We'll just say that.
Where you've killed yourself and almost decked yourself, as you said too.
Yeah. I've lost. Well, I've killed myself to, like, not decking yet, but I've killed myself to damage in the ring at least like 3 or 4 times.
Whoops.
I got tempted. I don't know what to say.
Tempted by the fruit of the One Ring.
Yeah.
Exactly. You like Squeeze, Devon? You like 80s music, right?
No comment.
I saw your Twitter post about your search on. I was going to put my Spotify search. You were like, "Here's my search,"
okay.
And then I was like, "I'm too embarrassed about my Spotify search to post it on Devon's like cool looking metal music," what I assume is a lot of metal music.
Yeah.
But yeah, mine was like Dua Lipa and Sleep Token and alt country, and I was like, okay, I don't. Dad has left the chat. Was kind of how I
like
felt
Sleep
about
Token.
it. I would love to talk about Sleep Token. So I don't know where I am on that. Maybe we'll tack this at the end. I mostly am like, wow, this is very unexpected music.
Yeah, it's different for sure.
Yeah. Anyway. All right, Devon, this other list that you have here, Dimir Asmo with Tor. So you have been wanting to play food decks a lot. You guys had mentioned it. Obviously, those are more, looking at them with Samwise. Now we've got one that's, this isn't really a food deck, right? It's more of a time sieve plus Emery kind of list, but I'll read off some of the cards that are in this for people to see it. So you've got your kind of like your Underworld Cookbook, Oval Chase Daredevil, Asmo kind of engine that's in here for one thing. You've got Ledger Shredder and Emery, as well as, Ledger Shredder lets you do a discard outlet. Emery lets you recur whatever artifacts you'd like to, notably the One Ring. You've got a couple Unearth to help bring back some of the creatures that are in this deck. You've got a couple Spell Pierce just for goodness. You have an Urza Saga package, so you have an Aether Spellbomb, a Shadow Spear, a Springleaf Drum to be able to do that kind of stuff. 2 Street Wraith. You got 4 Baubles, of course, and then you've got 4 of the One Ring. And so this looks a little bit like a Time Sieve combo deck, but maybe it's not fully a combo, right? How you would expect it to work, at least.
Yeah, so it's weird because the versions before, like the versions of the Time Sieve food decks, used to play Academy Manufactor, but I didn't really know, like when I was building this deck, I didn't know what else to cut for the One Ring, so that was kind of the card that got on the chopping block. I've played 2 leagues with this so far. Now, I don't know if it was maybe, small enough sample size, but I haven't really found myself like necessarily needing the manufacturers, because the thing about the One Ring is it draws you so many cards that as long as you have like a Time Sieve and the One Ring, you can find enough, like maybe you have 1 or 2 cookbooks that can provide 2 of the artifacts 2 of the 5 that you need for Time Sieve, and the Ring can kind of just find you some other random artifacts, like you throw in a bauble here, maybe a drum here, a saga token here, and you can take like one turn, and then once you get that first turn with the ring, then you get another like 3 or 4 cards off of it, and that should be able to just snowball. Eventually, the setup that you're looking for is get all 4 cookbooks into play with a Daredevil, so that's generating 4 food tokens per turn, and then you pair that with either an Emery or just like some random other stuff, and then you just take all the turns basically.
Wow. I love that the sentence that just left your mouth was get all 4 cookbooks into play.
Yeah.
Just get all 4 of them.
Honestly, not that hard. You have 4 sagas, 4 cookbooks. The ring draws you, a bazillion cards.
Yeah.
And the other cool thing about this deck that I kind of forgot because I haven't played this deck in so long is Shredder is a discard outlet for Asmo. That's a cool thing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So you've played 2 leagues with this so far. How'd it go?
8-2.
8-2. Oh,
So
geez.
2-4-1s. Not too bad.
That's good.
I've been thinking about one thing that somebody had mentioned in the Twitter replies is you can be a Giganta deck if you just cut the 2 Straight Wraith. So I'm thinking about going -2 Straight Wraith for 2 copies of Manufactor to sideboard the Giganta. But I will be playing a little bit more with on stream to kind of get a better feel for it. But initial impressions have been good so far. Oh, also one more thing I want to mention. Which this might hurt your ears, so you might want to plug your ears for this one. But Emery plus 2 the One Rings is basically an infinite loop because you get to recast them over and over again. You get the protection trigger every single turn.
Yeah, that's
gross.
Brutal.
I did that against my Hammer opponent, and they were not happy.
Did they tell you in the chat they weren't happy?
Well, I mean, I could kind of get it, but they just can't ever attack, right? And they don't really have removal for Emery, so it's like, how do they interact with that?
Yeah, not in game 1 for sure. I mean, you might have the people who are playing Solitude or that are playing the Path to Exile randomly, but they definitely aren't going to have a lot of removal for Emery. That's for sure. And they probably might even side it out against you because they're like, well, I don't need this now. So okay, so this deck. It's interesting. So now we have this sort of like constellation of ring decks that you have played, right? There's sort of like the simple decks at the end where it's like, we're going to put it into Panza and it's just going to be a great value engine. And that's what it is. Then we're going to, in 4-color, it's like, it's going to be the most incredible value engine ever already in a deck that's filled with value engines. And we're going to take a special advantage of it in a different way. Now we're tipping our toes into like combo versions of the deck, whether that's Reanimator, where the ring is just helping you drive that. I guess in this one, it's similar to the ring is something that you're pulling up. You can do a soft lock with it, but it's really your combo is to take all the turns with Time Sieve more than it is to just kind of kill somebody with the ring somehow. So this emerging meta game that we have right here, like, do you think when do you think we're going to enter the phase of like ring decks being metagamed against ring decks? Is that happening already? Is it happening soon? Like, what do you think about that?
It's really tough to like think about the metagame against each other. I mean, I guess really the only instance of that really happening is if you look at the 4-color decks, like this is kind of a great example where you look at the 2 from the final of the Saturday Challenge, the one that Spike lost in the final. So if you look at Harry's deck list, you see I guess they were both playing Leyline Binding. My apologies. I don't know why I thought that Harry was not playing Binding, but I guess like that maybe is something like the 4-color decks playing Leyline Binding because like early on, like the first week of challenges, there wasn't as much 4-color, but as the metagame kind of adapted and there was a lot more people playing with the One Ring, you're going to see a lot more Leyline Bindings, and I think maybe that's like the change.
The big indicator.
Yeah.
What do you think about combo decks playing ring versus like mid-range decks playing the ring? Right, like that traditionally a mid-range matchup versus a combo deck does depend a lot on the tools that the mid-range deck has like available to it to disrupt the combos. But generally, I think that's kind of like, well, if you're a mid-range deck and I combo you with something that's really effective against creatures, you can't kill me, right? Like, so are we entering that kind of phase or?
Well, it's weird because if you kind of think about it from like a normal perspective, normal mid-range versus combo, you would kind of assume that the combo deck is slightly favored in that heads-up matchup. But if both players have the ring, I actually kind of would rather be on the mid-range side of things, because in a ring versus ring fight, the 4-color or the mid-range deck's rings are going to be a lot better than the combo deck's rings, because that protection is way more relevant when you're not dying to the combo turn.
Right.
If that makes sense.
That totally makes sense. and you have protection from everything. So there aren't too many things that they can target, that a combo deck can target you with. Although notably, Cauldron Familiar, which we'll talk about maybe in a little bit, is one combo that certainly gets around the trigger from the ring.
Thassa's Oracle too. That one you get
Thassa's Oracle.
Yeah, Thassa's Oracle.
Yep. Good point. Do you want to talk about before we leave this ring deck section, we have this blue-white control list that is from Anzid, top-aided, the 630 and 7-1 with blue-white control with ring. I mean, this is kind of similar to everything else. It's just the most controlling version of it. So this list is Subtlety, Solitude, Narset, Parter of Veils, which helps you. It's good against your opponent's rings. Time Raveler, Prismatic Ending, Counterspell, Time Traveler, Reprieve, Cosmic Rebirth, which is always like, okay, we're bringing ring back and we're bringing other things back. Force Negation, Supreme Verdict, and 4 rings, Leyline Binding, Shark Typhoon. I mean, this is a blue-white control list with the one ring just jammed in here, essentially. How do you think, do you think that this is, this is a staple probably going forward with the one ring, but like, where does this fit in the whole story that we've been talking about so far?
It's weird. We kind of talked about it a little bit earlier. I would like if you expect a lot of the 4-color deck, I don't want to be the player casting Counterspell against Delighted Halfling. That seems like a kind of a really bad place to be. So I think that Control is maybe a little bit better against a lot of some of the other decks, but specifically the setup of like Halfling, Teferi, and Ring is kind of a lot for Control to slug through, even with the 4 Leyline Bindings. So I would caution a little bit about busting out the counterspells now.
Yeah, totally.
Or have like maybe you have to go up to 4 Prismatic Endings and have more answers to Halfling because of that.
Mm-hmm. Totally makes sense.
But yeah, Control's good. Control's good. It's a good deck.
Yeah.
I would never play it.
Devon, I would never play 4-color. I would never play Control, but everything else is on the table. All right, so leaving this section on the ring, and I know that we spent another hour already talking about the one ring. But it's been a huge card for Modern, obviously. It's a much bigger value engine than I think a much more usable and pervasive value engine than I think people were really prepared for it to be. Going back to the discussion I kind of brought up at the beginning, we were talking about 4-color and entering this 4-color arc. Those are all tied together with having like a new boogeyman in Modern, essentially. This happens sometimes in Modern, right? Like I said, it happened with Uro, it happened with Oko, it's happening with the Ring, it happened with Yorion at certain points in time. There's other cards I'm sure that I love to play that other people hate that I'm sure that they would throw into this same bucket. But it just got me thinking about counterplay, like talking about counterplay to a single card or a card like this. And so I was just trying to think about what type of counterplay is the most effective to the one ring, just to like draw a final point to this. So when I think about counterplay, I kind of think there's 4 moments, right? 1 is you stop the card from getting into play. 2 is you destroy it when it gets into play. 3 is you punish your opponent for the fact that it is in play. And 4 is play a deck that takes advantage of the conditions in the metagame caused by its existence popularity. That's a long point, but what that is just sort of like deck selection, right? These are... do you think that's broadly true? Like if we think about playing against a single card or against somebody's plan, these are really the 4 options that a player has, right?
Yeah, no, that definitely makes a lot of sense. As if we want to go down the list, as far as we'll go to the first point, stopping it from getting into play. I guess the most broad answer would be Counterspell, which,
right.
To be fair, again, you have to be a little bit careful of specifically that point, as we talked about again because of Halfling. It's fine against the non 4-color versions that aren't playing Halfling, but gotta be a little bit careful about that one.
Yeah, the other card I was thinking about with there, honestly, because I've been playing Scam, is Thoughtseize.
Okay.
Right? Is like going with Thoughtseize there, which I'm not sure is super. It's not super effective in this metagame either, because if your opponent's main thing is a card drawing engine, like taking away their one copy of it, it's good, but
what happens when they draw the other one?
They're likely set up to draw the other one, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, so for me, I think that if we think about the 4 categories I laid out, and that's a great summation of like, this is what's going on with stopping it from getting into play right now against the Ring. I would almost take that off the list of like effective paths to metagame against the Ring. You're probably not going to do well with decks that are trying to keep it from getting into play. Do you think that's true?
I would agree with it. Maybe the exception, I guess, I was going to say the exception of Blue Eye Control, but they have a lot more of stuff on the list specifically, so maybe that's like a different example because, yes, they have a lot of 1, but they also have a lot of 2, and they also have a lot of, you know what I mean, so on and so forth.
Yeah. So the second category here then is destroy it once it gets into play. When I think about this, obviously the best spot removal that we talked about for it right now is leyline binding.
Yep.
Right. And maybe awkwardly followed by prismatic ending, which is like a lot of the decks that are playing prismatic can get to 4, but they don't want to. No, I mean, you're probably, and it's probably way too late if you do get that. But then there's other cards that work as well. So if you think about the Saga package, the Saga package carries several tools that are possible to get rid of a ring with. One is Haywire Might. The other one is you can be super awkward and get Shadow Spear and into Beseiju, which is expensive, but it makes it possible for a deck like that, right?
Look at the text on Shadow Spear. I thought it only stopped hexproof. Does it stop indestructible too?
It stops indestructible. Yeah, let me check really quickly.
It's been a while since I've used that ability because I remember I used to use that against Boggles specifically, where I would just go Shadow Spear and then Fatal Push.
Permanents your opponents control lose hexproof and indestructible until end of turn.
All right, there you go. I actually didn't even think about that.
But it's not the most effective use of mana, but it does give decks that play those cards an out. Right now, who's got Saga and Boseiju? Green White Hammer, I guess. I don't know. What's the other one? Hardened Scales. There.
Oh yeah,
that has it too. But I'm just saying, like, that's the weird thing is that's sort of the next best thing to leyline binding, I think, honestly, is doing stuff like Haywire Might and Shadow Spear, da-da-da-da. Do you think that's true? Like, what other options are around that we even consider as spot removal?
Those were the two that I was going to mention the most is leyline binding and Haywire Might. Because of its indestructibility, there's really not a ton else. I mean, I guess you could go towards something. People have been suggesting Revoke Existence and Hammer, but like the problem with that is it's sorcery speed, so you can't blow it up instant speed. I mean, I guess you could go for March of Otherworldly Light, but that's a 5-mana play, or you're pitching multiple cards to cast it. There's really not a ton here that actually gets it off the battlefield.
Well, and there's the new card that's in Lord of the Rings, Cast into the Fire. But like, as much as we talked about that card being an option in Modern, it's a sorcery, right?
No, it's an instant.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
it's an instant.
that one's actually pretty good because it's an instant.
Okay.
And
good.
Against stuff like Yawgmoth, if you can live the dream and pick off 2 ignoble hierarchs or whatever, then you probably won the lottery. But yeah, that one's if you're playing red, that's probably your best bet. If you're playing red and not green or white, like if you're not a Binding Shell or you're not a Saga Shell, then that might be your best answer.
Yeah, and the other thing about permanents like this that you generally would do, like thinking about other ways to interact with indestructible permanents, the other one is bounce, right? Yeah. And like bounce is not
bouncing the ring is you don't want to do that. You don't want to do that.
Yeah, and so it's not like you can do you can't do like your Brazen Borrower or something and get some tempo off of that. That doesn't help. That just helps your opponent. So I still feel like when this all comes down to it, we're gonna say that destroying it when it gets into play is one of the most effective things against it. But the problem is the cards that are good against it it's a very limited selection of what those cards are. You think that's true?
They're restrictive, 100%. Yeah. And I was just thinking of a point. The one thing that I will mention, so typically when there's an artifact in the format that gets really prevalent and popular, you want to go towards something like Force of Vigor. That's always been the most ubiquitous answer to artifacts and enchantments. And it's not a great time to be playing Force of Vigor right now, as we talked about earlier.
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
Although I guess you can set up Shadow Spear into Force of Vigor.
Hey, there you go. If you're Hardened Scales, you can do that.
So, okay, all right, Rhino's new plan. We're going to cascade into Shadow Spear to turn on our Force of Vigor's post board.
I love it. And you're gonna pitch all those cards to get rid of one ring. Yeah. Turns out they just drew 15 against you effectively instead of just 5 or whatever. Okay. The next way is to punish the opponent for the fact that it is in play. This is generally, I think, when you're thinking about countering somebody's cards that they have in their deck, I feel like this is one of the least effective paths generally to like punish the opponent for having it, because they're still getting the advantage that they wanted off of it. And the main reason I put this on the list is because I think everybody's thinking about Bowmasters is a card that I know some people are believing is a good card against the One Ring right now. I see your face, Devon.
Yeah,
describe your face for our listeners. Describe it.
I can't think of a good word to describe it, but
it looks like
unwell.
It looks like you just tasted a lemon.
Yeah, maybe I put lemon in my coffee this morning. I don't know.
Stan is bemused. I just don't think that these, another card.
He's just stone faced.
Yeah. Maybe Blood Moon is another card that punishes an opponent for the way that they had to make their deck work to make a payoff work. That doesn't apply to the One Ring either, because as we said, it's colorless. So, yeah, I don't know. This path feels particularly ineffective against a One Ring to me.
The only thing that I can really think of is and I could envision a world where they activate it once, maybe twice, hopefully not twice, but once or twice, and you Pithing Needle it, and then they have to sit there with the ring in play with a counter or two on it, taking damage. But that doesn't even work that well, because all of the ring decks, even if they're drawing one, if they get 2 activations, then they're up 3 cards, and who cares? And they can probably find another answer to your needle anyways. But they can also just play a new ring and keep the new one that doesn't have any counters on it, even though they can't activate it. They still, you know what I mean? So I don't know. That's maybe not the best answer. Like you said, Bowmaster, maybe Narset Parter avails, but we're getting into some deep territory at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I would sort of love to be in a moment where Narset is really good. Narset's a very cool card. It's very good in Legacy, as we know, but here it's never quite found the same home in Modern in the same way. And then the last thing is metagame against it. Pick a deck that is just better.
One more for number 3. Does this?
Sure.
I'm gonna read 2 words. Tell me if this does anything for you. Notion Thief.
I swear I was just thinking about Notion Thief. When I was writing this up, I was like, Notion Thief is a card that does something, and I know people play it in weird. Don't people play it in Legacy occasionally? I know they play it in EDH, but I mean, is this a 4-mana answer to a Notion to someone's 4-mana permanent? Seems a little sketchy, but I don't know.
Well, I mean, if they play it and activate it immediately, because they're incentivized to, if they're playing the 4-color deck, they're incentivized to activate it immediately to try and find a pitch card or something.
Right.
Where you just you slam this, or maybe you even hold the Notion Thief until the second activation, so you can get 2 cards out of it. I don't know, maybe. Also, it's hard to find a blue-black deck that wants a 4-drop, so. Yeah,
exactly. And just so, in case people have forgotten, Dragon's Maze, All-Star Notion Thief. It is a 3/1 for 2 generic blue-black with flash, and says an opponent would draw a card except for the first one they draw on each of their draw steps. Instead, that player skips that draw and you draw a card. So you can take their cards when they draw them. It keeps the ability. It's not a comes into play ability. So as long as it's in play, they can't activate the ring anymore, really, unless they want you to draw cards for some reason. But the it's a 3/1, so it dies.
That's still a lot.
Yeah. So, but there's probably, I shouldn't maybe be dismissive of this category though, because the more that we talk about sideboard cards and permanents that people bring in against different matchups, the more I'm remembering there's a lot of options for certain decks to bring in permanents that don't necessarily punish the opponent for having it in play, but they do make it not effective to have the ring in play. For example, like you said, even Lavinia, if it only lasts for a minute and maybe it's not exactly the right card, it makes it harder for them to spend their mana. It makes it harder for them to take advantage of the card advantage that they've accrued. So there's probably some tools out there that people will start using to sideboard against the ring in a way that maybe works in this kind of hate bearers kind of way, which is almost what this category is, punishing people with one of my own permanents for the fact that their permanents play is kind of hate bearish.
Would you consider Karn in this category? Sort of, because it's
think so.
Kind of like a needle type effect. Okay.
Yeah.
Because that's another good one that I think is part of the reason why Tron is doing so well, is because not only is Tron a good shell for Ring, but it's also a deck that's a good shell for Karn, and Karn is one of the most proactive answers because it's an answer that shuts down. The sick thing about Karn is it's similar to Needle, it shuts down their Ring so they can't draw a card if they immediately play the Ring. But it's harder to answer than Needle, and it's like a threat by itself. It provides you more advantage, provides you more threats. So Karn's a good one for this category.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah, that's one that I had completely forgotten about, but it's so true. Okay, so maybe we're kind of saying hey, category 1, not great. Stopping it from getting in play isn't great. Destroying it once it gets into play, yeah, you're going to need tools in the decks that you play to destroy a ring once it gets into play, and decks that are able to field those well probably have a little bit of an advantage right now in the way the metagame is working. If you don't have ways to destroy it, you definitely need ways to make it less effective. I think Karn just kind of shot to the top of my list there as far as number one with a bullet for doing that in a way that's good and stays on your game plan. And Karn actually really leads you then to this fourth category that we're talking about, which is metagaming, selecting the right deck that takes advantage of what the ring causes in the metagame and maybe is just intrinsically good against the ring itself. Tron becomes somewhere on that list right now just because of Karn, I think. What other decks do you think are particularly effective against the game plan that the ring offers? Is there anything else?
It's tough to say because you kind of have to be a deck that doesn't care about the protection element. So we talked about different ways to win the game through the protection of Thassa's Oracle, Cauldron Familiar, stuff like that. So I guess you could maybe put that as a category. You could say, Tron is a good example of just going over the top, not caring. I don't care how many cards you get off of this ring. I'm just going to cast, Ugin or Karn Liberated or Ulamog and all this stuff.
Go over the top.
Yeah, go over the top of the ring. Past that, it's tough because if you try to go under the ring and kill them before they play it, they have the halfling. They have the halfling to ramp in the ring. You have some decks. If you try to go in the middle with scam, I don't. It's really tough. You kind of have to go. You kind of just have to super go over the top. I think because I think it's a little too difficult to go under.
Yeah, the one thing I would definitely Stan just asked in the chat, what about prowess, including Bone Crusher Giant as a thing to do? I kind of feel like the ring is exactly the type of card that I do not want to try to race against because it will take away my payoff turn. Basically, if they get a ring out on turn 3, a lot of times on turn 4 when they do the fog, I'm in trouble, and playing a 2-mana answer to get around the fog is also a little problematic because it makes my mana constrained. I can't get as many spells off with prowess. I do wonder if there is a racing it kind of answer. Yeah, Stan is asking in the chat right now, doesn't prowess also make it harder for them to draw too many cards since they have to pay life to do it? I think so. It puts them in some peril. The problem is if you're playing against Omnath, they just gain the life back with Omnath anyway, and Omnath is a big stop sign for prowess. I kind of felt like looking at the way that these decks are turning out that I don't know if there's an option for racing it. On the scam side, at least with scam, if you have Bowmaster, which is maybe a bad version of a punishing kind of permanent, but you do get to double, if you can luck into situations where you can double grief people, if you get the grief openings with scam, that's pretty good, I think, against this because you can take halfling, you can take a piece of their removal, you can also take a ring if they have it in their opening hand. I do think that can help you get in a spot where it's hard for them to catch up, although they have so much creature removal that they can kill your grief with a counter on it and stuff like that pretty quickly. But I think that if you are taking 2 cards off the top, it's maybe a little better than just thought seizing somebody.
I just thought of something as I just did a little bit of soul searching, and I was looking for cards that specifically cost 1 mana that says damage can't be prevented this turn. And there's actually kind of a couple here. So there's Wild Slash, which is one red mana instant, deals 2 to any target, and if you can control a creature of power 4 or greater, which not that hard to do in prowess, then damage can't be prevented this turn. So that could be something. And then there's also Unstable Footing. Most people don't know this card, but it's a banger from OG Zendikar. It's a red instant, damage can't be prevented this turn, has kicker for 3 and a red, and if it was kicked, it deals 5 to target player. Probably not that great because they get protection, but Wild Slash could be something where, similar to Bone Crusher Giant, you get through that one protection, that one turn, but at a little bit of a leaner mana cost.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Definitely. Okay. So, fun diversion here, I think, about just kind of thinking about metagaming against a certain card. I feel like this is a good framework to help think about it. Again, it's stop it from getting into play, destroy it once it gets into play, punish your opponent or make it ineffective when it is in play, and then metagame, take advantage of the deck and the conditions in the metagame that happens from it. I feel like we're kind of hitting a conclusion that it's not that great to stop the ring from getting into play because of the way the deck sets up and the tools that we have for it. destroying it once it gets into play. It can be very good if you are in a deck that has leyline binding specifically. That's probably your best answer. After that, your best other answer might be a Saga package with Haywire Might. And also, after that, you're looking at maybe Cast Into the Fire, which is okay, but not great, but maybe it's got some applications. That seems like the weakest answer there. So category 2 is maybe a little bit fallback.
So for number 2, I guess the one pushback I would say is Yawgmoth gets to play Court of Calling, so they can even like main deck Haywire Might. So that's like not just the Saga decks, but also the decks that can play Court of Calling can also support Haywire Might.
Yeah, that's great. And actually, there's a couple of other weird cards that they could consider too. Like there's a card that also, I mean, maybe Haywire Might's just the best one, but I know that there's a changeling from
Vandal.
Yeah, there's like Masked Vandal or whatever that exiles something that costs 2, and then you don't have to pay an activation cost to go get it. So that might be better too. Or to use it. 3, punishing the opponent for the fact it is in play. That's where your Karn decks kind of come in. That's probably the best answer there. Maybe Bowmaster, though I still have my doubt. I still think Bowmaster is a very good card. I don't think it's good for that reason. And then 4 is metagame, pick the right deck, and all of this leads to that. So.
It's a good segment. I like that segment.
I think it's interesting to try to take a step back, because hopefully people can use a framework like this the next time a card like this comes up and just try to find answers. This, when this kind of stuff helps me brainstorm what answers are out there that we're not thinking about. Right?
Yeah, like that, that thing that I just did where I went to Scryfall and just searched for damage can't be prevented, and we came up with a couple more things. It's like there's a lot of weird things that you have to think about with cards like this, and like understanding how not only how the card specifically interacts with the rest of the format, but how the decks that are utilizing the card also, what their position is, and trying to figure out like, okay, well, how do I attack this card, or how do I attack these decks? It's like there's a lot to think about. So I like that segment.
Awesome. All right, let's spend 15 minutes before we get out of here talking about some of the decks that are existing outside of the ring. Does that sound okay to everybody, Devon? Good?
Yeah.
Stan? Nodding?
Nodding. Thumbs
up. Okay, so decks that exist outside of the ring, essentially, and living in this world that the ring is setting up for them. I think the number one on everybody's list that we would love to talk about more, Stan has been playing, perhaps next week once his voice is back, he can talk about it even more than we will right now. Living End has gotten a ton of buzz and huge upgrades based on this new set in a really subtle way, and that's just because of the land cyclers that we kind of talked about a couple different times. Some comments, you've got to love it when the commons are eternal playable.
Yeah.
And it's really... Oh, go ahead.
Well, it's so funny because we were talking, me and Shane were talking about this last week. I actually think that even though like there's this huge presence of the ring and it's affecting so many different decks, I actually think that the land cyclers were the most impactful to their specific deck.
Yeah, I think that's true. When I first saw the math on these things, Devon, I was like, we're playing 14 lands?
Yeah.
Like, that is unbelievable. Stan, I'm going to ask for a thumbs up or maybe even a yes-no, a croaky yes-no. Or good. How did you feel about having a very small number of lands in your deck?
He said, that's all you need.
That's all you need. Never a problem. I mean, here's the crazy thing about the math, and I took people through this on Slack at one point in time, but if you do a hypergeometric calculation on what the draw, how likely you are to get 0 or 1 lands with a deck that only has 14, you're basically going to open with 1 or 0 lands 50% of the time. And I think that you open with 0 lands like 20% of the time, if I remember right. I don't have it in front of me right now, but you are set up to draw 0 land hands a not insignificant amount of time. But Stan in the chat says you can still flood out if you open a 1-lander. You can still flood out if you open with a 1-lander because you're drawing so many cards. So maybe you just want a 1-lander.
Well, I mean, your hand could be like, let's say your hand is 1 land and then 3 ends, 3 Oliphants.
Right.
Are we keeping that? Maybe. I don't know. There's no... See, the problem with hands like that is like there's no Cascade spell and there's no actual cycler to draw into the Cascade spell. And that's like obviously an extreme circumstance, but...
Yeah, I can't imagine you keep exactly that. Stan's nodding his head yes. I think you would keep a hand that was 4 and probably 2 regular cyclers maybe.
Yeah.
But this card this has been huge for this deck. There were 10 decks in the top 32s of challenges, and they are... 6 of them had 14 lands and 8 cyclers. 2 of them had 15 lands and 6 cyclers. And 2 of them had 16 lands and 6 cyclers. it looks like to me from the notes that we have right here. So 14 lands to 8 full cyclers is the norm now. No troll generally, only generous and Oliphant is kind of where it's at. And the deck is just way more consistent.
Yeah, I'm looking at the notes didn't have the Sunday challenge, so there's actually 3 more living index, which unironically enough puts it actually the most played deck over the weekend over 4-color, which I was a little surprised by. But yeah, wow. And then just looking at these numbers here, we got looks like 14 and 8. 14 and 8 and 15 and 6. So 2 more 14 and 8. So yeah, it definitely seems like 14 lands, 18 cyclers is by far the go-to, which kind of makes sense to me because just the best living ends are the ones where you go like turn 1 cycler, turn 2 double cycler. That's how you want to use your mana. Like the cycler into Waker of Waves draws are good because Waker is a more impactful card on the battlefield than some of the other cyclers, but at the same time, like, you're exposing yourself more to Solitude. So by spreading out, you're giving yourself a lot more insurance against the Solitudes and stuff like that.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. I don't know what else to say about it. I mean, it didn't really change the deck other than it made it way more consistent, which is huge. I'm not trying to say that that's not that's not a huge change to the deck, but it's not like I don't think it's turned out to be a subtle thing. I think the big thing here is just, I can't believe how all in they are on this.
Yeah, well, like you said, because of the added consistency in the higher percentage of the draws, like where you go cycler into double cycler, that you can afford to make your deck a lot more all in because you're consistently putting 5 creatures into play on turn 3, whereas before maybe you go like cycler into Waker, and then you're like, okay, do I want to put a 7/7 and a 4/4 into play? Is that good enough? Probably not. So it's like you gotta wait a little bit. So it's just you're making your turn 3 living in so much better.
Yeah, and of course, as Spike mentioned before, and you guys talked about last week, the Ent lets you be able to cast Violent Outburst and through a Blood Moon, not Shardless Agent. I don't know, I almost said that, but it does let you get one of your Cascaders off, even if someone Blood Moons you. Not that we think that people are going to be playing a ton of Blood Moon right now, because I think it's not super effective against the ring decks, so that might not even be a real threat to Living End at the moment, but maybe
some of the living index are playing their own Blood Moons.
Right.
So.
What a world.
I know.
What a world. Okay, so Living End, I think, like, for fun, let's handicap pros trying to bring Living End to the Pro Tour. I think that this could easily be the second most brought deck to the Pro Tour, even though I think pros like stuff that is not quite as, it's funny, like the breakdown I feel like in pro metagames sometimes is like everybody's going to play the all-in deck or nobody's going to play the all-in deck, even though it gets a lot of play from large events that aren't Pro Tour level, let's say. But I do feel like everybody could wake up and decide, you know what, we're not gonna metagame against Ring. We're just gonna try to be faster, and Living End is the best deck at being faster than the Ring.
Yeah, I'm willing to definitely say that this will either be the first or second most represented deck at the Pro Tour. I think that's pretty clear.
Interesting. All right. Any other thoughts on Living End? Yeah, I mean, hey, I kind of agree.
No, that's all I got for Living End. Do we want to go to maybe a little scam action?
Yes, absolutely. So I do have to announce here that I did get a 5-0 with Scam this weekend on the friendly queues, as I mentioned earlier, which, clearly it is clearly a little bit easier than the competitive queues for sure. But
I wish I had some confetti to throw. I'd just throw confetti at the camera.
Stan says, does a friendly 5-0 even get you a free roll? Yes, it does. You get to, since it only costs 6 tickets to get into it, you actually get 2.5 out of a 5-0 with it, which is kind of nice. I think you get get 14 tickets. Yeah, that's me. I just came home from vacation, Devin. I'm looking at that bank account. I'm going, I can't afford 10 tickets a league right now. You do not get QPs. Is what Stan's next question. So if you're trying to, that's one of the main differences, I think, is you don't get QPs for that.
So we gotta do the math. How many friendly 5-0s do we need to buy rings?
Minusing 6 every time. We need 50 or so. So if you net 12, yeah, that's a lot. 50 5-0s. Who wants to do a trophy race with me in the friendly queues? Hit me up on Twitter. As long as you're not Aspiring Spike or somebody, who can also do it in the other one. Anyway, so Scam with Bowmasters. There's been a lot of people still playing Scam. Young Dingo still kind of leading that charge. Although Young Dingo also lately has been doing a lot of playing with 4-color as well, and specifically, I think a lot of people think of Young Dingo as one of the first people that brought Nissa from March of the Machines Aftermath into that deck as well, but has been playing it with it again. A lot of different lists here with different amounts of things. I've seen no Bowmasters, I've seen 4 Bowmasters, I've seen 3 Bowmasters. After the top, what are we looking at, June 24th, so about a week ago, Young Dingo said top 8 in the Modern Challenge with Bowmaster Scam, got taken down by Corey Baumeister. I believe that's when Corey was on the grinding ring list, which we didn't even talk about Underworld Breach with Ring, by the way, which I still think has got to fit and figure into the metagame somewhere, but we'll say that for another day. Then Young Dingo says I was wrong about Bowmaster. It's good. Killed someone with Mount Dune 2. I thought that was pretty funny. Anyway, what do we think about Scam right now?
Well, like I put a little bit of a note here. I don't know if it's like how good Scam is or how unbelievable Dingo is at just playing Magic in general. Because I think he had I want to say he had 2 top 8s and a top 16 between last week and this week as well. He even had a list of Scam that did feature the One Ring. But we didn't put that in the Ring segment because he did, I believe, mention that in his tweet. And he said that it was actually a mistake that he that he played the Ring, and then he ended up playing the good list the day after in top 8. But yeah, this deck's great. I really do think that Orcish Bowmaster, not only as we mentioned, as a good way, kind of a good-ish answer to the Ring, being able to take out stuff like opposing Ragavans, Ignoble Hierarchs, all of that kind of stuff. I do think it is quite good. It's also pretty potent with Feign Death and Malice. Like if they go to kill your thing, you get it back. You get to amass the Orc again.
Yeah.
Good. I like it a lot.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that's really interesting with it. Oh, Stan is saying that he played some Scam as well. I haven't heard. I didn't realize that. So you 3-2'd with the Scam. Grief is still good. Bowmaster's not bad. Unbearable to play, and still runs out of gas. It's definitely a white knuckle experience sometimes because you're kind of like, I'm all in. I'm going to play 5 cards this turn, and if my opponent doesn't die as a result of this, then I am dead.
Yep.
But I had some interesting moments. In the league that I did, I played against Tron, Blue White Control, Blue Tron, and then Hammer were the decks that I played against, and it was pretty good. Weirdly, it felt like I was kind of always in the driver's seat against Tron, but that was generally because I managed to go faster than them. When someone goes turn 1, Urza's mine, and you are sitting on the opposite side of that on the draw, and you're like, well, I can put Fury into play this turn with Feign Death. I'm going to do it against those decks because, sometimes they have Dismember, but a lot of times they don't these days. And so you have to go for it then. And so being able to close it out that fast is good. And then in game 2, you have Blood Moon and you're going for it that way. That's fine. One of the best, I didn't get deep with Bowmasters. I only had 2. I could only rent 2. So I only had 2 in my deck. And I didn't draw it a lot of times. A lot of times I drew it. It was just fine. It was just like two 1/1s, and then maybe I get a ping off of it. But I did really surprise a Tron player where they had a Wormcoil engine out, and I was like, oh, how am I going to get around this? And I thought they were going to block my countered up Fury with it, but instead they blocked Ragavan with it, and they were like, I'm going to take a bunch of damage, and I'm gonna they'll recover from the 6 they got from that and kind of survive one more turn. So I flashed in Bowmasters and killed my own Ragavan so they didn't gain any life, and then it just killed them, which I felt like a genius when that happens. But that was really the only time I actually got to use it, and it did something. I do think though, when you think about Orcish Bowmasters, the more that I think about it, Scam benefits from having 24 creatures in it. I think it's just nice to have extra threats. And what else am I going to play in this deck? Am I going to play Blood Tithe Harvester? I remember that there was a list 4 or 5 months ago where I'm forgetting his name. What's that? Willie Adel was playing a list with Blood Tithe Harvester, and I was like, I don't even like that card in Pioneer all that much. So playing it here seemed out of nowhere. So I really like the fact that I just had an extra threat that has some extra value with it, and that's just kind of all that it is, and that's fine.
Yeah, I think if you look at the Dingo list, I think what a lot of time is what Dingo's cutting is the 1 mana removal. So you see no copies of Bolt, no copies of Fatal Push, and that's what looks like. That appears to be what is being swapped out for Bowmasters. Like I'm looking at Dingo's latest list from I think this is the Saturday Night Challenge, and there is 4 Bowmasters, 4 Terminate, no Bolt, no Fatal Push. So keep that in mind.
Yeah,
which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, the list that I played had 1 Fatal Push and 3 Lightning Bolts in it still, and had a Croxa as well. So I think what was cut out of here was like I didn't have any main deck Blood Moons, and I had less lands. Actually, it looks like no. Yeah, I'm not sure, but I the list that I had some space for Lightning Bolt in it still, which is hard to get over.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the other list. Yeah, it looks like, okay, from his other list, oh my god, he's got two lists this weekend. The other list, well, that's the list with the ring. So there's 4 Bowmaster, 3 ring. Again, no Bolt, no push. Mana. So yeah, looks like we're on 4 Terminate. And I wonder if that's just a product of like, you don't expect a lot of hammer time given the presence of opposing rings, because hammer time is not great into ring. It's really not a good time to be playing hammer time right now.
Yeah.
Uptick of 4 color, uptick of the rings. So maybe that's like a concession where you can be like, okay, well, if nobody's playing hammer, I can afford to cut the 1 mana removal.
Yeah. But at any rate, I mean, it's interesting to see Bowmasters show up in like Grixis Death Shadow too. Like I think one of the challenges, the 630 challenge, I think was won by Grixis Death Shadow, which is Grixis Death Shadow, just like you might imagine it, with Bowmasters instead of Ledger Shredder, which actually seems like a totally possible thing as well. Stan is asking, is Hammer the biggest loser in the LOTR meta? I think Hammer was already on the wane a little bit, and yeah, I think this probably just pushed it even further just because of how bad it is against ring triggers.
My take is actually a deck that I don't know how we've gotten through this entire podcast and haven't mentioned this one deck, but where the heck is Creativity? That was just the best deck in the format 3 weeks ago, and it's essentially vanished from entirety. And I think part of that is, one, it is arguably the only deck that realistically cannot play the ring, given that its deck constraints, creativity, if you would creativity into the ring. So please don't do that. Don't put creativity in your ring in your creativity decks. Please don't do that.
Because you don't get the trigger?
Well, I mean, you would rather just creativity into Archon, right?
Yes, although I did see one that had one as a one of, and I found it
just
intriguing,
the
but
dice.
maybe I'm crazy. I will tell you, Devon. Now Shane will not hear this before he gets here, but I did sleeve up Creativity to play against Shane, and I did throw my 1 copy of the ring in my Creativity deck to see what happens.
No.
But boy, it sounds bad when you talk about it.
Yeah.
Right now. Yeah.
Yeah, because, well, that's the thing, right? If you creativity for 2, you're like, well, maybe I'll hit an Archon and a ring, and I want to hit 2 Archons, but... And then the other thing is, specifically, the Archon of Cruelty trigger is really bad against a ring protection. So, like, the natural curve of if you have the ring player on the play, and they play turn 4 ring, and the creativity player's, like, looking at their hand, like, normally they would want to go for creativity here, but if you put a 6/6 into play, it just doesn't do anything because they have protection for a turn. So, yeah, I really think that creativity is, like, I'm not going to say non-existent because people are still playing it, but I think that's the biggest loser for sure.
Interesting. All right. It has made it to the top 8s of a few challenges.
It has,
over the weekend as well. So I guess we'll be curious to see where it goes from there. I noticed, by the way, since we're talking about creativity for a second, that Reprieve is showing up in those lists as well as a way to get around the uncounterable thing from I assume from Delighted Halfling. Also, that's why it's better than Remand, but we'll see. It's not like the most effective thing in the world always to do that.
Right.
All right, then the last deck that we have hinted about a little bit is Samwise combo.
Mm-hmm.
What do we all think about Samwise? So you played it some this week.
Played a little bit. I played a little bit, a couple of different lists. One that was more food centric, and one that was more combo centric with like Court of Calling and Collecting Company. I think I like the combo version a little bit more, specifically because you have the just kind of the ability to Coco it into an instant speed win if you Coco into, like, say you have a Cauldron Familiar and you Coco into Sam plus Sack Outlet, or you have a Sam and you Coco into Cauldron Familiar, Sack Outlet, so on and so forth. And I think the biggest advantage of this deck over specifically Yawgmoth is Yawgmoth can't really afford to play Collected Company because Yawgmoth is a card that you can't hit off of Coco, but all of this deck's combo pieces can be hit off Coco in addition to Grist. So I think that's like a significant upgrade to, or why you would want to choose this over something like Yawgmoth.
Why it's worth giving it a shot.
Yeah.
Don't email us, Yawgmoth crew. We know you're out there. Yeah. It's not like it's bad. It's actually might be
Different.
a deck that's done okay in this meta, right? Yawgmoth?
Yeah.
Or is it bad against the ring?
Okay, here's the thing, okay? Can we really call it Yawgmoth anymore if there are 4 Bowmasters and 4 rings? Because at that point, it's kind of like this, when elves and legacies started like cutting down in the elves, it's no longer an elves deck, it's like a Golgari mid-range deck.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean, there's still Yawgmoths, but like there's no Strangleroot Geist, at least the Zerkless that won the challenge that had rings and Bowmasters. So, I don't know. We got to get into some debates about that.
How many ring mid-range decks can we create? Next week on the Dive Down, we got red-green, we got 4-color, we got black-green, we got, where's Jund? I heard Shane talking about Jund last week, and I was like, Jund Saga, you can search up answers to the ring, but...
Speaking of Jund, did you see that there was, we're going on a tangent here, but there was a Jund list that top-aided, it was like literal boomer Jund. No sagas, just, let me see if I can find that. I didn't put it in the notes, but I'm going to put it in the chat real quick.
Okay.
There. I didn't put it in the notes, but yeah, just like actual Boomer Jund. No sagas. We got Ragavan's Tarmogoyf, Seasoned Pyromancers, Furies, Shieldrids, Ren and 6 Liliana the Veil, Discard
I mean,
spells.
Shieldred versus the ring is certainly a thing, right?
Yeah, that is.
Like, if Bowmaster's not enough, what we're also going to do is we're going to make you take 2 damage every time. But I will say, like, I sided Shieldred in from the sideboard of Scam multiple times when I was playing that league, and it actually helped a number of times from people who were doing card advantage-y things against me. Again, not the ring itself, but like take 4 damage off of the ring and then take 2 more during your upkeep. It's not the easiest thing in the world to get around.
Right.
But yeah, this deck is wild. Why?
Stan says, how much does playing the One Ring change your advantage bar? Man, I really, really hope, because I don't remember, have we had advantage bars from the last 2 PT coverages? I can't remember. I
don't think
really
so.
hope they bring it back for this PT. Watsy, if you're listening, please give us the advantage bar. We need it.
Yeah. All right, and with that, I think that's the way to wrap up this week's show.
The advantage bar?
A genuine plea to bring back the advantage bar so we can see how much you change it when someone plays the One Ring. I think Modern's in an interesting place. I think a lot of people think it's kind of monotonous right now, but this happens. It's new, at least for a minute, and let's see what happens for a little bit. I still believe that there's some kind of tech that's going to come and unlock that kind of good matchup matrix for deck against decks that play the ring. There's some deck out there that's just absolutely demolishes decks that rely on the ring, but we'll see. Maybe not. But tune in next week to find out. If you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe to our podcast so you get the latest episodes as soon as they come out. And if you use Apple Podcasts, please leave us a rating and review. And please go check out our Patreon at patreon.com/thedivedown or our store, thedivedown.com/store. If you'd like to submit a question or reach out, you can also tweet at us at thedivedown, all one word, or email thedivedown@gmail.com. Special shout out to producer Stan this week for staying on this call the whole time and lending his energy, if not his voice, directly to the show. And Devon, of course, for joining us again. Also, shout out to Mana Traders for sponsoring the Dive Down. Sign up for Mana Traders using promo code TheDiveDown2023, all one word, for 10% off your first 2 months of renting Magic Online cards. Also get some amazing shave soaps, body soaps, fragrances, and more at Barrister Man using Dive Down M23 for 15% off your first order. Save money on paper cards over at Nerd Rage Gaming with code DIVE8 for 8% off your order. And then, as always, thanks to the bands Nowhere and Spaceblood for letting us use their music. And until next week, get out there and tap a ring.